Now, on to the evening's event. We decided that we really wanted to celebrate the beauty of British wine, or I was going to say English, but British wine this evening. And I'm really, really glad that we did, because when Ben first sent me these cheeses so that I could work out the wine pairings, I was blown away with the quality, the diversity of these cheeses. And I would be lying if I said that I hadn't thought about retasting the St. Jude every day ever since. So we wanted to focus on those British cheeses, and whilst it would have been lovely to do British wines to go with all of them, we have got one British wine, but I think actually it's a testament to the cheeses that they can stand up with wines from all around the world. So we've got a nice selection of wines for you as well. And then last but not least, due to unprecedented demand, some of you may have either received an alternative cheese or had to order an alternative port. But fear not, Ben and I are going to be crystal clear, because we're going to talk about everything that was offered to you. And if you don't even have any of the cheeses or any of the wines tonight, or you have some or not the quite exact ones, it really doesn't matter. Actually, we just hope that you'll share in the joy of cheese and wine and good company. And as long as you've got a little glass of something and a dairy treat next to you, then hopefully we'll all learn a bit of something along the way as well. So without further ado and all my mumbling, I am ready and thrilled to introduce Ben to talk about our first cheese. So good evening, Ben. Cheers.
Thank you so much. So I think I will start by describing how we're going to taste cheese. So it's so easy to just devour all of this beautiful cheese in front of us. But it's really great to be able to think about the flavors that come through the cheese and how best to do that. So if I look at, for example, some of you will have Brightwell ash, which is this ash coated like hockey puck, cheese. But some of you will also have the Stichelton Hill, and they're both made by the same producer, and they are a goat's cheese farm made in Oxfordshire. And if I look at this cheese, I see the ash coating, and the ash coating signifies a lot of the time a goat's cheese, so especially from the Loire Valley, and that's where they got that inspiration from. And then I look at St. Jude, which everyone should have. There are a couple of different ages of the St. Jude that we've sent out, so some are fairly young, so up to probably about 10 days old at the moment. And then some of you have got a St. Jude that are about 2 weeks. So I'm feeling these cheeses, I'm looking at these cheeses. They're obviously high moisture content. They're highly dense. They're fudgy in texture, and so I think they're going to be, quite what we call a lactic set in the cheese world. But I will go on to lactic set and how we set cheese, and how we look at cheese, and how we assess cheese by its moisture, by its complexity. I look at the next cheese, and I've got Westcombe. Some of you will have Hafod, but they're both cheddars. One is made in Wales, and one is made in Somerset. They're actually, funnily enough, made by the same people. So I look at this cheese and I think it's a hard cheese. I look at the rind and I think it's been cloth bound, and you'll find that on both Hafod and Westcombe. And then I look at Stichelton, which is your last one, and I think it's got blue in it, so it must be a blue cheese. It's slightly yellow in colour, so it must be a cow's cheese. And then I look at the rind and I know that it must be matured naturally. And then we think about the smell. So if I pick up my first cheese and I smell it, and it's obviously goat's cheese to me. It's beautifully floral. It has that real richness of goat's cheese. And then I look at St. Jude and I cut into St. Jude.
Just whilst you're cutting St. Jude, Ben, sorry to interrupt, but members who are not seeing Ben, that will be because your laptop or tablet is not in the right speaker mode. So I'll give some really quick basic instructions, but essentially if you're on a laptop and you go to the right-hand side of the screen, you should be able to select something called speaker view. And if you have a keyboard associated, you can hit Alt F1. Alternatively, if you're on a tablet, scroll to the side and you'll get one big picture of the speaker. So apologies to interrupt, but if you're still having trouble, feel free to email the tastings team and they can resend you the instructions.
So the next one is St. Jude. And I smell this cheese and automatically I think of cows, and I think of the herd, and I think of the land. It just smells beautiful. And then I go to Westcombe or Hafod. And again, this Westcombe has a real grassiness to it. And savoury. And then I go to Stichelton. And I can smell the blue, and I can smell that real, I would say, umami and savouriness to the Stichelton. And then we come to tasting a cheese, and we don't just want to put the cheese in our mouth and have a couple of chomps. We want to really chew away at it. So I would advise keeping it in your mouth for as long as possible, chewing away, and then also breathing out of your nose. Because you get different senses through your mouth and through your nose, and you get different flavors and complexities through your mouth and through your nose. So I'd really advise doing that too. So Anna, shall I start with Brightwell and Snowdon?
Absolutely, and I think we've got some pictures for you as well that are going to pop up too.
So Brightwell Ash and Snowdon Hill. So you will have either one or the other. And the reason that you have one or the other is because if we're very honest about it, when I did a tasting, my first tasting with the Wine Society, we had about 100 people that signed up to it. So Norton Yarrow are a very small producer. And so when you're ordering cheese from them, you have to be very specific about the amount of cheese that you're ordering, because they have 100 goats. And so their production is extremely small. And so I thought, okay, well, we're going to have about 100 people on this event. So I'll order 100 Brightwell Ash. Well, amazingly, 210 of you, 215 of you bought the selection from us. And so I realized this on Thursday of last week. So we were scurrying around. I was scurrying around with buyer thinking, what are we going to do? These cheeses are a couple of weeks old. They can't make any more for us. So we did what we could. And many of you got Brightwell Ash and many of you got Snowdon Hill. Now, they're both made by the same producer. They're both stunning. It's the same milk, but they're different ages and they use different starter cultures. So they're both made by Rachel and Fraser in South Oxfordshire. So on the left, you'll see you have Snowdon Hill. On the right, you have Brightwell Ash. They first started making cheese so their first cheese was made in 2016. So they're very new cheesemakers, and that was Snowdon Hill. That was their first love. And they only started making cheese because they were on holiday in Sicily in 2014, and just read an article in a magazine that was left over by a previous couple or whoever they were in the chalet that they were staying at. And they thought, they're from farming backgrounds, and Rachel was a teacher and Fraser was a project manager, and they saw this article and thought, why don't why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we going into cheese making? They came back from this holiday in Sicily, and they spoke to the Earth's Trust. And the Earth's Trust are a business, a company that basically they help young dairy farmers or farmers in general with setting up their first farms. So they went into that in 2014. In 2016, they made their first cheese. 2014, they had 2 goats. And so they had a mother and a daughter. And so they just started experimenting with Cinnamon Hill. So Cinnamon Hill is a lactic set. They're both lactic set, but Cinnamon Hill is a lactic set, which means it's using the lactic acid within the fermentation process to coagulate the milk, which means that basically it's a long set. And when you get a long set, you get a real moussey texture. And you'll find in both Brightwell Ash and Cinnamon Hill, they're both really moussey, and they're so decadent and beautiful. So Cinnamon Hill has geotrichum around the outside. So geotrichum is that like brain-like structure, and geotrichum gives that complexity to a cheese, as well as looking really beautiful. Brightwell Ash has less geotrichum and also a bit of candidum. So candidum is whereby if you see on a brie, you have that like white coating. Candidum is basically that white coating, and it gives a real like barrier to the cheese. It looks beautiful and it holds it really well.
We've had comments already as well, Ben, of people saying they're absolutely loving it. So I think it was a good one to start with for sure.
I think so too. And the wine we spoke about previously, it goes super well.
I'll tell you a little bit about the wine if that's all right as well. Although actually, gosh, the cheese is just mind-blowingly delicious. I think when you sent me the selection, and this was the first one in the selection, and I've actually got the Cinnamon Hill this evening, and I had the Brightwell Ash to start, but I've tried this wine with both of the cheeses now, and they are exceptional. So this wine is the Bacchus, and it's the Bacchus dry. I say dry just because it's not a sweet Bacchus, which you can make, and it is made by Camel Valley in Cornwall. And Camel Valley are based in Dorset, and I'm going to tell you, sorry, no, they're not Cornwall, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about them in a minute. I think the main thing to talk about with this particular pairing is to give you a bit of background on the grape. Bacchus is it's a creation. I don't like to think of them as Frankenstein grapes, but it is a combination that was produced in Germany by crossing Riesling Silvaner and Müller-Thurgau. It was made in the 30s and made commercially available in the 70s after lots of testing. Now, it is very popular in Germany, but actually here in the UK, where the yields are lower and the temperature is lower as well, you get the higher acidity and a bit more flavour, actually, arguably, in the wine. If anybody's looking for a like-for-like comparison, especially if you've never tried Bacchus before, the grape it gets most commonly compared to is Sauvignon Blanc. So when Ben gave me a cheese that had been, or imitated, it's probably not the right word, celebrated the cheeses of the Loire, it made complete sense to pair it with the great famous grape of the Loire, but not. So we've got an English version of Sauvignon Blanc. I think that's the strength of Bacchus, because so many English wine consumers love Sauvignon. So actually, Bacchus has got the potential to be the grape of England, really, for me. It also won the best white wine single varietal, a Bacchus wine did, in the Decanter 2015 World Wine Awards. Best single varietal wine in white wine in the world. So there's a lot to come for Bacchus. This particular Bacchus, Camel Valley, is owned by an ex-RAF pilot called Bob Lindo and his wife Annie. And they basically bought a farm to relax in, but Bob and Annie were like, this is a beautiful space. I think we've got a photo of it, but it's not the end of the world if we don't get it up. But this, Bob went and did a vintage in Germany so that they could grow grapes. They took courses and they planted 8,000 vines in 1989. Their son is now the winemaker. They've been made these sort of, here we go, beautiful shots. And the next shot as well, ladies and gents, is their sort of pairing tasting space outside, which I think you'll all agree, when we are allowed to go, there might be a rush down to Camel Valley, especially if we can't travel, but we can go and sit there. That sounds absolutely dreamy. So yes, why this wine? It's the British answer to a Sancerre. It's tangy, high acidity, those lovely lemon things that Ben was talking about, that creamy mousse can be cut through by the acid. Both wine styles are quite light as well. We've ordered them thus so that we can go from light to slightly heavier, shall we say. So I think for a kick-off and an aperitif pairing, I think it's pretty tricky to beat that combo, but we'll try our best for another 3, won't we, Ben?
I know. I also, what I love, I don't know, my Brightwell ash here, it has quite a high salt content, and I think this Bacchus just cuts through it so well. Yeah, I think it's absolutely stunning.
Great stuff. Well, thank you. I think without further ado, I'm conscious of time. We could be here forever, but I think it's time to move on to the St. Jude, if that's all right, Ben.
Yeah, of course. So St. Jude is made in East Suffolk by a lady called Julie Cheney. Julie Cheney originally made Tunworth, and Tunworth is a really, probably one of England's most famous cheeses, I would say. So Tunworth is made in the Camembert style in Hampshire. So she originally made Tunworth with Stacey Hedges, and it was raw milk. And she they had a TB outbreak, which you do in cheese. It's just what happens, and so they had to pasteurize for a while. And Julie is so passionate about raw milk that when this TB outbreak had subsided, Stacey decided that she would like to stay with pasteurized because it's easy to manage. But Julie's so passionate about raw milk, she couldn't go back to doing just pasteurized cheese. So she stopped cheese making, and then she heard on Radio 4 one day about a guy called Johnny Crickmore over in East Suffolk, that he had just brought some Montbéliard cows over from France. So he was going to make a breed of Meaux, but in England. So Montbéliard cows on the right. They have great big hooves, which is fab for climbing in the Jura, but also for really good wet pastures. And they have a really good, funny tuft on their head as well. But they're fabulous milk. So basically, they're really high protein, high butter fat, which just makes this stunning cheese, which is either Baron Bigod or St. Jude. So Julie makes St. Jude, which is a lactic set. So the same as the goat's cheese. So we're talking about a long set, which again makes this moussey texture. On the left, you can see Sancerre on the far left and St. Jude on the right. So St. Jude, so Sancerre basically is St. Jude, but washed. So tonight we have St. Jude, which is made by Julie. It's raw milk, it's traditional rennet, tiny bit of rennet. So rennet obviously coagulates the milk, but rennet speeds up coagulation. But she puts a tiny bit in, so it's at just the right point where she wants the basically the milk to use it again, the lactic acid within the milk to coagulate, which keeps the flavors in, and then a little bit of rennet to make sure that it doesn't take too long. Yeah, it's again on the outside, it's a geotrichum rind. So you have that brain-like structure. But then she has Penicillium candidum, which gives that whiteness to the cheese. So you get complexity from the geotrichum, but you get a nice coating from the candidum.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Ben, we had a couple of questions about people, and I had a tiny bit of literally specks of the mold, and it actually looked a bit like the penicillin style mold.
Yeah.
Are those the older versions of the cheese that we could expect that on?
So recently, Julie originally bought her cultures from a company called Cockard in France, and because of Brexit, she's been really struggling to get these cultures regularly from Cockard. So she changed her cultures to two different companies in France that could easily send cultures to England. And one is called Stander, and Stander send her cultures over. Now, when you change cultures, it changes the cheese. It's like changing recipes. If you think about making bread, it's changing your yeast. It changes your starter cultures within sourdough. You have to start again. So she's been really trying to do the best she possibly can. Some of you will have these this bluing on the top of the cheese, which is just penicillin. It's beautiful. It's fine. She expects it. Some of you will have a really young cheese, and they're just two different ages. Within its life, you'll find that Sansera or St. Jude will always have penicillin strains on the outside. But some of you will have a really young version because basically we had to withdraw quite a lot of stock that had too much blue strain. So we didn't have enough to send to everyone, but we did what we could.
Oh, it's lovely. And I think, yeah, for me, the a little penicillin, lovely. Not a problem. We've got two more quick questions before I go on to the wine, because they are about the cheese. So I'd rather keep them. I'd rather keep them now, if that's all right. One is from Mike Bullitt, who would just quickly like you to explain, Ben, what washed means.
Okay. So wash rind is basically washing a cheese with a brine or an alcohol. I don't think we use anything else. So brine obviously is a salt solution. So as soon as you wash something, for example, St. Jude with a brine, it becomes Sansera, and basically it just it makes how do I describe it? It pushes on different kinds of strains within molds, and one of those is bee linens. And bee linens basically break down the cheese quicker than if you didn't have a wash. So it gives that real pungency, that stinkiness, that
sort of speeds some processes up by washing it.
Yeah. So Sansera, you'll find will be younger than a St. Jude. It wouldn't last as long as St. Jude.
Thank you. And then we have one other question, if you don't mind. Phil Manville, I mean, you may have sort of answered it in that, but be good to clarify. Will it go runnier as it ages?
So St. Jude, no, it will always be moussey. It won't break down. So when we talk about breakdown, we look at from the outside of the cheese to the inside. With a lactic state, you don't get it so much. It doesn't go runny. With a washed cheese or a soft cheese, then you would expect the breakdown to go from the outside to the middle. But with a lactic set, you wouldn't expect that, no. But if you had something like brie, then you would expect it to have a breakdown all the way through. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And then last but not least, we've got a couple of people saying if you're allergic to penicillin, you probably shouldn't eat much of it, but I'm guessing we're talking minute amounts here.
It's a different strain.
There we go. So if you're allergic to penicillin, fear not, you're not allergic to St. Jude, which would be a terrible shame for everyone, actually, because it's so delicious. Yeah, members or
we wouldn't send the cheese out, if
with allergies.
No, definitely not.
Fair enough. Thank you, Ben. So it's my turn to wax lyrical about a wine now. And I'm delighted actually to present this wine. One of the reasons I'm so thrilled is I think it's a bit of a unappreciated gem in the wine society. It actually was a wine champ last year, and we still have stock of it, and that's quite rare. And possibly it's the Loire is a little bit less understood than other regions in France, but hopefully if you haven't tried this wine before and you've ordered it this evening, then first of all, I'm hoping you enjoy the pairing, but second of all, I'm hoping you just enjoy the wine, because get it whilst you can, really. So it's a Chenin Blanc from the Loire. I'll show you the bottle. Le Plantagenêts. Oh, there we go. We've got an even better picture, even better. So Loire Chenins, what would you normally expect, and why did I go for a Loire Chenin? Well, they tend to be high acid. That's great, because that lovely rich cheese Ben's just described, or many of you are tasting, does definitely need something to help that rich mouth coating feeling. They often have a slight minerality, and I think with these kinds of cheeses that can be a beautiful complement, that sort of stony. A lot of people have are anti-using words like stony or mineral to describe wines, but I think if that's what you're tasting, say it. I'm not going to tell you off. And then the fruits are things like stone fruits and apple. And I think actually that this is a nice kind of accompaniment to this style of cheese. So this particular wine was produced, or is produced, I should say, by a carved cooperative. So it's called the Carved Samura. And Saumur itself is a particular part of the Loire. I will show you just where it is here. There we go. So it's kind of right bang up as you get towards sort of Tawny area. It's very famous, the Saumur, for being white focused, but it's particularly famous for its sparkling wines. It's also got these amazing tuffeau soils. And so if you are tasting something minerally in your wine, a lot of scientists will say you're not tasting soils, and a lot of winemakers will say that's exactly what you're tasting. So choose the church you follow, is my thought. So this particular cooperative, this is Saumur as well, this lovely picture here. A great, when we can go abroad, maybe this will be option number 2. If we've all gone down to Cornwall, we'll all see each other again in the Loire Valley. But this particular carved cooperative was founded in the 50s by about 40 growers. It's since been absorbed by another organization, and they cover 850 growers. Although this particular wine, they just take the grapes from 160 growers, and they won't, all 160 won't make it into this, but this particular sort of section of the cooperative. And a cooperative, I won't go into too much detail, but it's a lovely idea, really, that growers can't afford their own machinery, and so instead they club together and they will buy machinery and facilities so that they can all bring their grapes in. This particular wine had a very good write-up on Jancis Robinson, particularly for the price. We're not talking about an expensive wine here, and I think it got 16 or 17 points and was declared very good value. So I'm surprised, honestly surprised we have any of it left. But why did I pair this in particular? So I actually wanted a Chenin. I felt like a Chenin or a Chardonnay was the right way to go, because I wanted that richness, and I wanted flavors that were less tropical and slightly more stone fruits. The South African Chenins I really tried were a bit too tropical, and that wasn't right for me here. It didn't need to be tropical, it needed to be orchard fruits. I think we were talking about smelling those wines and getting the smells of being outside and the grass and greenery. I wanted to smell orchard fruits whilst I was kind of indulging in this lovely cheese. So that was important to me. And the structure. So I mentioned the acidity earlier. That's super essential. I was going to say if there were any key contributor to the first 2 wines in particular, acidity would be really important, because I feel with any moussey cheese, you still want to feel refreshed once you've had the pairing. I also read quite a few reviews that said the cheese was similar to Saint-Marcellin from France. And I think a Saint-Marcellin is perhaps a little bit older, more pungent. And if I were going with a Saint-Marcellin, I may have gone perhaps for like an older Burgundy, or even an older semi-sweet Vouvray style. So you start to get a bit more complexity. This is much more an easy drinking summery wine, perfect for a young fruity cheese. And I think, yeah, again, just sort of transported me to summer. So I hope people enjoyed it. I've had a look. Yeah, a couple of people. Yes, Ros, very different from South African Shannon, absolutely. And I'm the biggest believer in South African Shannon. I drink it by the bucket load, but it really wasn't right for this cheese. And I tried two. And, you know, I tried one that I'd ordered as a sample to taste. And then I thought, oh, that's not right, but it must be because of that particular wine. And I went and then got two more out of my own cellar to try. And I was thinking, what's happening? But it's just that kind of that tropical, often use of oak. There's no oak in this, and I think that really suits the freshness of the cheese. So it was a tough job to go through 4 Chenin Blancs in total to make the right choice. But there we go. Someone has to do it, don't they? Yeah. So yes, I hope you enjoyed. There's a few people saying yes, dedication to the research. I agree. I've tried. But on that note, I think we're probably ready, Ben, if it's all right with you, to move on to the 2 cheddars. Yeah. Unless you have any thoughts on the wine.
No, the only thing is the cooperative in France. I think it's, you know, it's just similar to how the cheese world has worked for many years in France. You know, everyone gets together. They bring their milk together just as they do the grapes, and they make fantastic cheese. You know, we work with a fruitier in the Loire that's called Jacquin, and Jacquin does Celticher, Saumur, and Valençay, but they're in between them all. So they got all of the milk that goes from all of those different regions into one fruitier, and then they make all those different cheeses. So yeah, that's how it works in France, isn't it? Yeah. But we can go on to the next ones, which is Hafod and Wescombe. So originally I'd chosen Hafod. Hafod and Wescombe are 2 of my favourite cheddars. Hafod is made in Wales, and Wescombe is made in Somerset. Now, the reason I chose Wescombe once we'd run out of Hafod is because it's the same maker that makes Hafod that moved over to Wescombe. It's also the same herdsman that was formerly working at Hafod that moved over to Wescombe. So it made the most sense, and also they're both absolutely beautiful. So Hafod is made by the Holden family, so they're 2nd generation. Becky and Sam are making them at the moment, and their father was called Patrick. They're Airship Cow, so Airship Cow have high butter fat, high protein, but quite a low yield of milk, whereas Wescombe have a mix of Holstein Friesian, and then they're just starting to introduce Ayrshire. So what's great about Ayrshire cows is that, again, they've got quite widespread hooves, and it's really, you know, pretty rainy in West Wales, and so it's fabulous, you know, for Ayrshire cows. They are raw milk. Both are raw milk. They're both traditional rennet. Hafod isn't cloth bound anymore, but it used to be cloth bound. Wescombe is cloth bound. Wescombe is about a 24 kilo round, so it's what you'd expect of a cheddar. However, Hafod is about a 10 kilo round. And so if you have a 10 kilo cheese and a cheddar cheese, as you can see here on the rice, it means that in maturation, it doesn't take as long to get the flavors from the outside to the inside. Whereas with a 24 kilo cheese, it takes a lot longer to get the molds and the flavor of the atmosphere to get inside the cheese. So they decided on a 10 to 12 kilo cheese. Cheddaring is something they both have in common. So cheddaring is a process where you're bringing moisture out of the cheese. So you are cutting the curd, you're milling the curd, and then you're putting the curd all together in a vat, and then you're turning it. So this is perfect. So on the right hand side here, you can see this is cheddaring. So they cut them into blocks and then they're cheddaring them. So they turn them upside down, and they do that for Hafod for about 2 hours. So they're 2 hours of turning these blocks of cheese to just draw out further moisture. So we're salting the inside to take out moisture, and then we're turning them to draw out even more moisture. Again, Westcombe and Hafod, they're both cheddars, and they go through the same process, but they're made in completely different places. And so they're obviously going to taste different, just like wine does. You can get a grape that's grown in one region, and then you get the same grape grown in a different region, and they're going to taste completely different.
Thank you very much, Ben. Yeah, it feels a little bit like grape varieties. We were just talking obviously about Chenin, grown in different places, can make such a difference in the terroir. But sometimes there's just a recognizable trait, and naturally a cheddar is a cheddar, and it feels like a cheddar, it tastes like a cheddar, but it's learning the nuances. And I'm not there with cheese yet, but I'm getting there with wine. We did have I've got a couple of questions for you in particular, Ben.
Okay.
I think the first is from Sarah, who is happy to unmute herself. I think it's for both of us potentially, but Sarah, are you there?
Yes, good evening. Thank you very much so far. It's been lovely. I've had all the cheeses and one of the wines.
You've got your priorities sorted there, Sarah.
But my question, and I put it on the chat, so everyone's aware of it already, but how do cooperatives actually work, both from a wine perspective and from a cheese perspective?
Anna, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So co-ops can work in a few ways, and wine can get a bit complicated when you start to talk about négociants, etc., because there are sort of different ways that you can join a cooperative. But if we're talking about a classic wine cooperative, they tend to elect a president. And so, for example, the wine we've just had are on their third president, a gentleman called Jean-Louis Basile, and he will basically be a decision maker, often with a panel. So you might elect certain people and they act as your representative. And then, without being too crass, they do. I noticed your comment was around tasting. They actually would also, in a winery, they'd taste the grapes as they come in, and they would classify them. So the best producers, the best growers, for example, would potentially be put into a higher or more premium wine, and then the lesser good ones would go into a lower one. So
I specifically asked my question about, like, how does the quality get tested, i.e. top, middle and bottom?
Yes, so they do it.
For cheese and milk and wine and grapes.
Yeah, so they test it with the grapes and then again with the juice on the wine. And Ben, I don't know what stage they test for quality on co-ops in France.
Well, they would expect that the local farms, which they inspect consistently, would all be exactly the same, and so they all bring their milk together, and they would expect from from their testing throughout the year that they're all. I think with milk and with cheese, it goes on. It goes on your word. They trust each other. They've been doing this for hundreds of years, and it's generations of families that have been doing this. This isn't a new thing. Like, they've been like, this is how France works.
Absolutely. And I think, there's a little bit of that as well in the wine industry, but I think they can be quite stringent on quality. And sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, the grapes that very good producer doesn't use, he sells to the cooperative. And if you're quite savvy, you know, I remember as a child, my parents telling me about a Sauterne that was a cooperative Sauterne, but I can't even remember the producer now, but they said that they'd heard on the grapevine, sorry for the pun, that this producer's sort of less good grapes, but still incredible quality, were going into the co-op. And that happens a lot in France. So if you get the right information and you know that good grapes are going to the co-op, they're probably selling very good quality wines at a fraction of the price. For Craig and Elaine joining late, we've just tasted the cheddar, and we are about to talk about, and you've chivied me on, which is great. We're about to talk about the Glenelly, and then I promise what we'll do is get through the next two wines and cheeses, and then we'll ask some more questions as well, because I am conscious of time. So Glenelly, I will be speedy-ish, because it is a wine to savour. A member asked whether you should have decanted the wine in advance. I didn't. You just saw that I'd poured a glass. And actually, if I'm really honest, it smelt better about 20 minutes ago than it does now. The reason is this is quite a fragile wine. It's older. It's nearly a 10-year-old New World wine, and it's not a super expensive one. So if you have just poured your glass now, fear not, you won't have ruined it. If you did decant it, again, it's still going to be alive, so don't worry. If you decanted it yesterday, you might be in trouble, but hopefully not. So it's a Bordeaux blend made in South Africa. Why Bordeaux blends and why South Africa? I'll go on to exactly why I got to this wine in a minute, but Bordeaux blends and the Cape have an incredible affinity. So the first Bordeaux blend, i.e. a grape grown in South Africa a wine made in South Africa grown with grapes from Bordeaux, was introduced in 1979. So they haven't been producing this style for very long, in a winery in Paarl. But the most famous wine arguably came a year later. So in 1980, Meerlust produced a Bordeaux blend. And then a year after that, Cannoncott, the Paul Sawyer blend. So those are some of the most famous Bordeaux blends from New World countries that exist. Reasons why they work, well, there's a lot of sunshine, so grapes can ripen. Cabernet actually struggles to ripen a lot in Bordeaux, so some years it's too cold, some years it's too wet. Cabernet absolutely thrives in warm countries and warm climates, so California, parts of Australia, South Africa, they're real Cabernet hotspots, and that's why. Again, I picked a wine that, and Gil recommended this to me. I said, I really want a New World Bordeaux blend. I'll tell you why now, actually. Basically, this cheese to me, it didn't feel like a cheddar that sort of was so salty and dense. It still had some fruit. It still had some tart, some punchiness. And I felt like it had a lot of complexity. And for me, I was looking for something under £15. If you're looking for an under £15 Bordeaux, it might not have been able to deliver quite that level of complexity. But also the fruitiness. Sometimes Bordeaux, traditional Bordeaux wines don't have as much freshness to them. They might have been aged in oak a bit more, or all sorts of reasons. But the fruit doesn't always come out as much when you're looking at an older, more complex wine. For me, this had the perfect balance of fruity and savoury and earthy. That meant that it worked really well with the cheese. And yeah, it was Gil's recommendation, and I couldn't have thanked him enough because it was a great shout. It's from Stellenbosch, so it's actually from the Idis Valley, which is on the southern slopes of the Siemensberg Mountains. So this is their estate here. You can see we're right way out, a few hours out of Cape Town. And for anyone, again, who's not been to Stellenbosch, pop it on your list. One of the most incredible wine regions to visit in the world. But what I love about this wine is it was bought by a Madame... her full name, the old producer owner of Chateau Pichon Comtesse, which she basically left there in 2003 and came here, and this is from the Glenelly estate here, and she wanted to produce Bordeaux blends. They were already very popular, but actually this is a traditional Bordeaux blend, which I love, which is in the 19th century in Bordeaux. They used to add some Syrah to the left bank. So those traditional Cabernet-based wines also had a touch of Syrah. Not surprising considering that Syrah ripens a little bit easier in colder climates. But this now is not legally allowed. But this harks back to that 19th century practice. So it's mainly Cabernet, and then it's got some Merlot, some Syrah, and then Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. So it's a real classic Bordeaux blend, which I love. Richness counters the cheese, the alcohol balances the saltiness. For me, it's just two powerhouse flavors. And I can't really, again, believe that there's this level of complexity of fruity plus earthy and old and leathery and woody, all for £15. So yes, I hope you enjoyed it. But I think we'll have to move swiftly on. So I can see some good happy people, and I know it's sold out at the moment, but we do actually have a couple of bottles in the showroom that I spotted today. So on April the 12th, if the showroom can open, fingers crossed, then whiz down there. But if not, we always buy the Glenelly Estate Reserve, so you can grab it another year. Ben, I'll pass back to you. I'm conscious of time, so I apologise.
Well, I have no idea what time it says. It's not telling me on my screen. But the last cheese that I'm going to describe is Stichelton, which is one of the most beautiful blue English cheeses that I could ever explain to you. So Stichelton is made by Joe Schneider, which he's on the right hand side, not on the left, obviously. And he developed this cheese with a gentleman called Randolph Hodgson, and Randolph was the founder of Neal's Yard Dairy, and they founded this cheese because of basically the original Stilton before 1989 was a raw milk cheese. So you'll find that the two biggest Stiltons these days are Colston Bassett and...
I didn't catch that. Could you try again?
The technology is talking to you, Ben.
I'm going to stop that. I'm sorry.
I'm not.
Because I mentioned cheese, I think. So before 1989, all Stilton was raw milk, unpasteurized. And after that, there was basically a big food poison outbreak, and they blamed it on the Stilton. And so the Stilton Association decided that it was always going to be pasteurized after that. So basically in the, I think it may have been about 2005, Randolph Hodgson of Neal's Yard Dairy and Joe Schneider, who worked at Dalesford at that point, so making Dalesford cheddar, decided they were going to basically find this original Stilton. So Stichelton comes from the original name of Stilton. So Stilton was originally called Stichelton. So it's raw milk. It's traditional rennet, but they put tiny amounts of rennet and they put tiny amounts of starter culture into this cheese. And then it's a long set, especially for a blue cheese. So we're talking a 24-hour set. So you have high moisture levels and you keep that flavor within the milk. And it's honestly, it's ever changing. You expect with the raw milk that it's always going to change anyway. But Stichelton is one of the most, beautiful blue cheeses, and something that we should definitely celebrate. And I quite like to say that I found a quote from Randolph. So Randolph passed away a few years ago now, but he explained this cheese as milky, buttery, a rounded up front flavour, a syrupy sweetness, blue flavours that are cold and not peppery, and with a good long finish. I just think it's absolutely bang on for this cheese. I think it's it's
poetic. That was really lovely.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Now I have to say, Lisa and Neil have taken the words out of my mouth, because I was hoping we were going to save the best for last as well. I do like blue cheese, but I wouldn't say it would be my first type of cheese of choice. And this for me is my favorite blue cheese I've ever tasted. I think that freshness, that lightness, that sweetness that he mentioned as well, all of those things kind of came into play for me. It's quite an elegant style of cheese.
It is, absolutely. I completely agree. There's so much going on, and they've worked so hard to find the way that Stilton was originally, and you know, they go as far to say when they're hand ladled, so the curds are hand ladled into a vat from one vat to another, and they put muslin cloth or cheesecloth over the other vat, and then they leave that to set for 12 hours, just so you don't have to move it too much. You don't have to, you know, turn it with your hand,
disturb it. Yeah,
because they just want the milk and the cultures to do what they do best, which is enhance flavour.
Beautiful. Well, for my pairing, I have to say, blue cheese and port always seems like a classic, but I did feel that a strong port or a very intense port would actually not be appropriate. And so you have 3 ports that I have suggested for the evening. The Taylor's 10-year-old Tawny, which is the one I'm drinking. We then have the Dow's Reserve, and we also have the Graham's Natura, the Dow's late bottled vintage, and the Graham's Reserva. So the Tawny is slightly more aged in style, but it is only 10 years old. Sorry, I'm wreaking havoc with Gil's flicking of the slides by talking about them like that. So apologies. But essentially, the Tawny, even though it's aged a bit longer, is only a 10-year-old Tawny. Now, I haven't done it this evening, but I encourage you, and I'm going to rebuy this cheese in the summer. Slightly chilling Tawny really brings out the freshness. Yes, somebody having sloe gin, I bet that works well. With this cheese, it feels to me you want to match that vibrancy, that lightness of touch, all of that kind of more genteel and elegant things. So a chilled Tawny for me would be great. And then the Reserva and the LBV, they're also aged a shorter time as well. So whether it's in barrel or it's in barrel or bottle, I really feel like a younger, fresher style of wine is better here. So if you do have a beautiful old sort of 1960 vintage port, gorgeous, but I would pop that with a Roquefort or a stronger Stilton. For me, the style of port that goes better with this is definitely on the fresher side. I'd also encourage you actually to try your Cabernet, or if you have a Cabernet or your Glenelly, I think that would also go as well. But yes, I won't go into the details of port. I don't think it's the right event to do that, but I've actually got a tiny description of the Dow's wine, which I think is a good description for anyone who's got the Dow's. And really reflects one of the great varieties that goes into their wines in particular, which is exuberant aromas of blackberry and licorice. Oh, pardon me, my mouse has gone haywire. Exuberant aromas of blackberry and licorice are complemented by the subtle notes of cocoa and mint. There is a floral element of roses, which reflects the Touriga Franca component of the blend. On the palate, the wine is full and broad, with concentration and intensity, but held together with fine structure underpinned by fresh peppery tannins. And I think that's a nice way as well to describe the wine. It's really complex, it's really rich, but it is fresh, it's fine, it's peppery, it's spicy, it's full of fruits. So I can't really think of a better compliment. And again, going back to those things we said about English flavours or British flavours and British cheeses, port for me just is so reminiscent of brambles and that lovely sort of bramble pie or those autumnal flavors. So yeah, I'll be drinking the Tawny chilled in the winter with in the summer with this, and then I'll have it again later in the autumn when I can get those brambly flavors out. But I hope you like the pairing. It was slightly more traditional than the others, i.e. it's a path well traveled, blue cheese and port, but I do think that particularly steering to the lighter styles of port with this lighter cheese would be a good one.
May I say, Joe would have killed you if you paired it with a red wine.
Joe would have done, yeah. Well, luckily Joe Joe the buyer.
No, Joe the maker.
Oh, he would. Does he not say? Does he not prefer it with reds? Is he?
He loves it with port or with beer. That's what he loves it with.
Well, there we go. I got something right this evening, in one person's opinion.
What's the trouble, Jude?
Oh, so we do have a time. I'm glad we wrapped up all of the wines and the cheeses bang on 8 o'clock, Ben. But I think if people are prepared to maybe stay another 5 minutes, we could answer some questions. How about that?
I'm in no rush.
You're in no rush. Where are we going, hey? Well, I'll tell you what, for those members who have to shoot off, whether you've got dinner or kids to bed, etc., I do hope you had a lovely evening. I hope you found some new wines or some new cheeses or both that you haven't possibly tried before. And even if you didn't try the cheeses, then I hope you've enjoyed the evening. Before other members go, I wanted to show you a picture, and I should have scanned it first, silly me, but this is my first experience in a cheese making facility with my sister. Oh, it's not working very well, but safe to say I do not look very impressed.
Where was this?
I think it's in Switzerland. We we don't look particularly delighted to be there, but safe to say my love of cheese has grown since then. But I thought members might enjoy that. So if you do have to go, I hope you had a nice evening, like I said, and if not, please do hang around and Ben and I would love to answer a couple of questions. So good evening and cheers to all of you on the way. But Ben, we can settle in with some port, some cheese and a chat.
Of course.
So member questions. I think we have got a few questions about cheese rinds, Ben, in particular.
Okay.
So I'm just having a quick scroll through. Particularly is it the rinds of the Cheddar? I think it was both actually, the rinds of the St. Jude and the rinds of the Cheddar. So if you would be able to, explain how rind affects cheese, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, of course. So if you think about St. Jude, you either have at 2 weeks old, or I think maybe 15 days old, or you may have it at 2 months. But it's geotrichum and it's candidum and it's fresh and it's beautiful. And that rind, you want to be part of the complexity of the cheese. You want to be able to experience the rind. So I would very much advise that you eat the rind of a fresh cheese such as St. Jude or a brie, which is a couple of months older. But when you come to Cheddar, now Cheddar is 12 months plus, otherwise it can't be Cheddar. And our son Cheddar can't be 12, can't be anything below 12. So on the outside of a Cheddar, you have lard or butter. And so lard or butter after 12, 15 months, 2 years, will become rancid. And I wouldn't recommend that you eat the rind of a Cheddar. It won't do any harm to you. It's not going to be bad. But I would eat so close to the rind that you possibly can. And it's something that we don't really get to describe on many tastings. But if I eat this, I want to eat here and I want to eat here, because they taste completely different, because it matures from the outside to the in. And so here will taste completely different to here, which will taste different to here, which will taste different to here. They try and taste the whole part of the cheese, but maybe not the rind. Honestly.
Thank you. That actually leads me, it wasn't a member question, but it's something that, so my dad did a few cheese courses in France when we were growing up. And I used to get smacks on the hand for cutting wrong bits off certain cheeses for that reason, that it's unfair if you cut the different ages out and don't let everyone experience it. So on that note, would you mind giving a little advice, particularly so I can please my father next time I see him? Please, can you give a little advice on where to cut the 3 cheese? Well, one of them makes sense, but if you had the 3 cheeses and not the St. Jude in the pot, the other 3, where would you cut those?
So I'll use St. Jude because I take it out of the pot, but you could just cut it like a cake. So you have the whole experience. So you have the geotrichum candidum, you have the inside, you have everything in one taste. So my cut would be like this. with a cheddar. I would cut it like this. And then I would eat from, this would be my piece. And I would eat the inside. And then I would try the bit in between, and then I'll try the rind, because they taste so different. And then blue, I think we've all got the same size blue. And again, I do exactly the same, although Stitch is falling apart quite a lot. But I would just eat the whole bit. But maybe don't eat the rind, or try the rind, but see what you think. With
Interesting.
Balancé, etc., you just want to cut that corner. You want to be able to eat all the way around.
So in a way, thinking about it from the outside in, if you're imagining the cheese was once whole, is quite a good general rule of thumb, right?
Yeah, no. If you think about it like a soft cheese, we put lots of so basically you put salt on the outside, and so that draws out the moisture, but that also draws out the flavors and the starch cultures. And so you want to taste the outside and the inside. With a hard cheese, you have the salt within the cheese, and so you want to taste, and it matures from the outside in. Whereas with a soft cheese, it does from the inside out a little bit. Gets quite complex there, I think. But
you want to keep the whole as much of the cheese from inside out as possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Now, I think we've got some other questions. We've had a few people actually who have asked about sides with cheese. I think one member said is quince sacrilege. So do you have any thoughts of things like quince, figs, nuts, those sorts of things?
No, I think it pairs beautifully. Quince with sheep's milk cheese is natural. It's always going to happen. I think you just need to look at where the cheese is from, where the fruit's from. And we talk about wine and cheese and the terroir. And you just need to think about the fruit. Yeah, I see no issue with that at all. I struggle with, in my opinion, just my personality, with chili and cheese. So having a chili jam, I feel like overpowers a beautiful, lactic set cheese. But apart from that, I just think it's subjective, isn't it? It's what you prefer. It's what you want on your cheese board. There's no right or wrong. It's just what you enjoy.
Fair enough. I think that's wine as well. Eat and drink what you think goes together, because there is no perfect answer. So, and on that note, John Dunn has asked me which of the three ports, in my view, went best with the cheddar. So I will give you my view, John, on that note. I do think the Tawny, and I'll tell you the reason why. The Tawny has been aged in large oak barrels. Or rather, it's been aged in oak barrels, but it's had 10 years of aging, and effectively a Tawny is oxidative, so it has a sense of development, and what that gives it, as opposed to the other two, which are ruby styles, is a slightly caramelized and figgy nature. You could argue that most ports are figgy, but caramelized is certainly not so common, and sometimes even something slightly woody, and those for me go better with the blue cheeses, and that is just, again, it comes down to the complexity front. I like that sort of extra note that in the wine trade you'd call it tertiary, so maybe slightly nutty, slightly caramelized fig situation. So personally the Tawny, but I do think that all of them go well. A question about each of our favorite pairings. Okay, Ben, I'll let you go first.
I thought Brightwell and Stellenbosch went perfectly with Bacchus. I loved that. That's the first thing I tried, and I thought, do you know what? Before we start the call, I'm just going to try this and see what Anna's been up to. And I thought, that worked super well. No, I wasn't surprised.
Your estimations of my pairings. Yeah, we should say, members, I'm the lucky one because I get the cheese first, then I get to pick wines and taste them with the cheese, and Ben gets sent the wines, and then yeah, I'm glad you're not pretending you like them, Ben. It's nice to hear.
I obviously don't open them till the night of the event, so I don't really know. Whereas you kind of know, but no.
I hope.
Yeah.
Good. Paul Watkinson has asked, what about Sauterne with the blue? I do think a Sauterne would be nice. There's a sort of moldy thing that people say often works. Mold botrytized grapes, so moldy grapes are used to make Sauterne, which again, the mold in the cheese is supposedly a nice pairing. Again, I don't know the science. What I would say is this isn't actually as heavily moldy. That's a strange thing to say, but you mentioned, Ben, about the different quantities of the cultures, etc., that are put into the cheese. Because it's not fully blue, i.e. all the way through, what I would suggest is maybe backing off from Sauterne and going with something like a Montbazillac, which has a little bit of botrytized fruit and then some fresher fruit as well. Haven't tried it. Happy to experiment and come back to you though, Paul, but I would probably a Sauterne can be incredibly powerful, particularly older ones. So yeah, having a Montbazillac with a bit more freshness, a bit less of that botrytized flavor might also work, but I have no doubt that a Sauterne would be great too. Yeah, absolutely. Sauterne and Roquefort is heaven. Couldn't agree more. Sandra, I hope I answered your question. Would a sweet white wine go with the blue cheese? The answer is yes, but I would look for botrytized ones. So Sauterne, Montbazillac, great examples of that. Lovely. So I think we're getting there on the questions front. So my favorite pairing, to answer your question, Valentina, I would love to say the St. Jude, because favorite cheese and one of my favorite wines. But I actually just think mainly for getting me into bluer cheeses and feeling a real affinity with a very traditional pairing that I maybe have a better understanding of or liking of more, I think I will go with the Tawny port at the end and the Stichelton, because I thought that was fabulous. Oh, final question from Sarah Dye, because we had somebody else ask it earlier, is Ben, how do you navigate a cheese board? And can I just double end that question with one, how do you set up a cheese board? Because I think that's quite a contentious question in itself. How many cheeses is too many cheeses? And then number two, how do you navigate one if you're at a dinner party, or we've covered cutting the cheeses, but perhaps, I can maybe answer the wine part, but if you've got any thoughts on the cheese, go for it.
I have loads of thoughts on the cheese. This is a huge thing. So a cheese board depends on the amount of people that you have. So your typical cheese board, if you have 3 cheeses, would be a hard, a blue, and a soft. And then I would look at doing those all British or all French or all Spanish, in my opinion. And then you can bring wines into that as well. So I would do if it was British, I'd do a cheddar, because we're so amazing like making cheddar. And then I'd do a Stilton or Stichelton. And then I would do a brie such as Baron Bigod. But then we go for the fourth, and I want to look at wash rind, or I want to look at goat's cheese. So that also goes into the fifth. So one could be goats and one could be wash rind. And then we look at hard goats, soft goats, and then we look at wash rind being a hard wash rind and a soft wash rind. So it depends how many people you're going to be catering for. So if you're going to be catering for, at the moment, what we're allowed? 0.
You could have 6 cheeses. I eat enough cheese for 6 people, so
don't buy too little, because if you buy too little, it won't last as long. But if you buy too much, then you can save it. If you buy a 500-gram piece, it will last you a month. If you buy a 125 piece, it will last you 5 days. So we have to think about like the portion size. I think as we're going out of regulations or into different restrictions, whatever it is, we need to think about we have more people in our household or outside. And so I would say 250-gram pieces, five 250-gram pieces, 1.25 kilos is great for 6 people. It's 200 grams each. So 200 grams seems about right for after dinner.
I mean, the thing is, you're the cheese man, and you have your brain on the cheese. It makes it impossible to pair wines, and that is the biggest challenge of all. So if you do have a whole range of styles of cheese, it can become incredibly challenging to find a one-size-fits-all wine. In fact, quite frankly, it's undoable. And if I needed to pick a wine, and this is quite controversial, I would say, for most people outside the wine trade. I think most people in the wine trade would say, if you need to pick a wine to go with as much cheese as possible, a dry white wine is your best option. Usually the acidity is high enough to cope with all of the fat content. In a way, we also kind of need some sort of rich dry white wine to cope with the power. But generally, white dries are better. However, I would take Ben's idea, and as he said, if you're picking a region or picking a style, for example, then I would suggest you narrow it if you can. So perhaps you might have 3 British hard cheeses and 1 soft, and then you could go with perhaps more a Cabernet or a structurally led wine. So the wine makes it really tricky with the cheese board. The other option is that you can have a selection of wines on the table, which actually, after I've had one too many wines in my first courses, I tend to do anyway. I'll open everything up and say, oh, this goes with this goes with this. But unless you want to turn it into a full-on cheese and wine pairing, which is fun, dry white wines are certainly the best. So yes.
I completely agree. It's all about the white wine with cheese.
Yeah. I think it's an unloved wine for cheese and wine matching, but we proved this evening with 2 whites that actually it can go well.
Absolutely.
Right, Ben, I'll have to let you go and have your dinner, but it has been an absolute treat this evening, and I thank all of you members for joining us. I hope you will join me in raising a glass, will be the Tawny port, to Ben, and to say a huge thank you for all of your information, your knowledge. It's been absolutely wonderful. I think it's it's a real testament to your knowledge that every time I speak to you, I learn something new, and you get me even more excited about cheese than I already am. So thank you for that, and I'm sure members will feel the same.
Yeah, Zana, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Hope to see you here.
Thank you all.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Jeremy. Bye, Roger.
Bye.